So when did you get back from your trip? I know you just got back. When did you get back?
I officially got back into Pennsylvania around 11 o'clock at night on Sunday.
Okay, so you've been back a little while.
Yeah.
Enough to kind of get somewhat back to normal.
A little bit, yeah. I'm still feeling it. That whole time difference. Like going out there wasn't bad, but man, coming back, it was weird. I thought about it. I got up around 7 o'clock Pacific time, so about 10 o'clock Eastern. And then I flew back, and just like those time changes are just weird as you're flying.
Yeah.
And I realized that by the time that I got back into Pennsylvania, I had been up for less time, awake for less time than my fiance had been at that point, because I had landed in Pennsylvania around 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
But it was only like 8 o'clock at night in Washington. So still being on that schedule, it was really weird, trippy to think about. But yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'm back, and I'm still trying to get used to being back.
So how was the experience?
Oh, it was great. There were definitely nerves, especially with like TSA. Like TSA is always like hopped up to be this terrible thing, going through TSA and dealing with the agents and all that kind of deal. Waiting in line was the worst part, because you're just waiting there for what feels like forever, especially flying out of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. But my biggest concern was because of having all the camera gear in my bag and my carry-on. Like, all right, please don't hand check this, or have to hand check it, or go through it, or pull me aside, or any of that kind of thing. But once I got through that, everything else was, for the most part, a breeze.
Well, it's good that you weren't bringing a film camera along.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Oh, that made it so much easier.
Because then you'd be like, please hand check this. Please hand check this. You know? Yeah.
Luckily, the machines that they have, I don't think are the newest ones, at least not yet. Not that I saw or could tell. And even so, coming back would have, or either way, it was only like one time that I was going to go through X-ray. So even with film, it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It definitely made my life easier going digital. And there's no way I would have been able to do half the photography that I did out there with film, regardless what I ended up having lens wise. I mean, I was using mainly the Fuji 500 millimeter, which is rough. I think it's 396 millimeter equivalent. And even that, a lot of the images I've had to crop into because that doesn't give me near enough range. So,
yeah. And for those listening, which is everyone listening as we've gone over in the past, like long focal lengths, they don't really, they do exist for large format, but they're really, like, you have to either rack the bellows really far out where you're going to be very susceptible to wind. And even then it's not that long of a lens. Or they have these telephoto designed lenses, which are really kind of big and heavy. And it's just something that doesn't really even exist much for large format.
Plus, not to mention, like, even if you have a 600 millimeter telephoto designed lens for large format, you're still only getting, what would that be? A third, so what, 200 millimeters?
Yeah, which is nothing compared to what you would need for what you were doing.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think it's crazy that 500 millimeters on medium format drops down to less than 400. But thinking about it with large format, I mean, you would need like a 900 millimeter lens or 1200 millimeter lens to actually make it work. And good luck finding one of those, let alone affording them.
And that was actually one of the lessons I learned very early on when I started doing large format, is that the normal lens is the easiest lens to use. It's the easiest to see the ground glass. It's easiest to manage the camera with. So it completely shaped the way that I saw subjects. Yeah. Just because it's not even really an option with the ultra wide or the really, really long. But so it's good that you had the kit that you had, so that you were able to work with some of those long lenses for those long reach shots.
Yeah. But I mean, even so, like, even having that longer lens, it is such a drastically different way of seeing. Like, it took me a couple days into this trip to actually start seeing in a way that was like conducive to getting good photographs, because you're not like I'm so used to, because of media or because of large format, I am so used to seeing right around like the 50 to 75 millimeter range.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
trying to see anything, like trying to look at a scene and be like, okay, this little section is roughly equivalent to what I'll be able to photograph or what I'll be able to see with this longer lens. Okay, what can I point out from there? You know what I mean? It's very, it's weird. It was a very weird kind of ordeal. I found myself attached to the tripod a lot, where I was just sweeping the camera around over these rolling hills, trying to figure out what I can all compose and how I can compose certain things, rather than just being able to look at the scene and do that without the camera in hand.
Yeah. And I could see how you'd have to train yourself to see subjects differently, to the point where maybe if I'm just like hiking along, I don't even really pay attention to those more distant subjects or those smaller subjects, because it's just not something that's even, it's nothing that I can even photograph. So I just filter them out basically. So it seems like kind of like in some of the past episodes, we're talking about just like the visual inventory, where you have to force yourself to look at things and then start realizing the potential for some of those further away scenes. Were you able to find, did you have to look through the viewfinder in order to find compositions, or were you able to learn to notice that before looking through the viewfinder? At
first, it was a little bit of reliance on looking through the viewfinder or looking at the LCD, but by the second day or so, second time of going out and photographing these hills, I was able to start just looking and getting a general idea of what's what.
Yeah. But
it was still, even if I had stayed out there for longer, it probably would have taken me an additional week or so of constant photographing with the 500 mil lens, just to get into the groove of, okay, this is how I have to see with this lens. Because I said, I've been conditioned to see like the 60 to 50 millimeter equivalent for so long, and I'm so used to that and only seeing that one way, that it's definitely difficult.
Yeah. Plus you're doing black and white, and I haven't really looked, but I haven't really seen a lot of black and white work from there. Pretty much everything I've seen is color. So I'm also curious how that, how that transpired.
So that's the nicest thing with the Palouse, is that pretty much everything that you are photographing has to do with light and shadow.
Nice.
It's a lot more, it's kind of like photographing in Death Valley, at least from how John Peterson had mentioned it to me, where there aren't a lot of obvious subjects. And so you're more looking at how the light and the shadow play on the rolling hills, or in Death Valley, the sand dunes, and how that the texture and the layers and the shape of everything kind of form a composition together. So black and white versus color, at least to me, really didn't make any difference. There's obviously times where color helps with that layering. Like you'll get a nice green hill in the foreground, and then in the midground there's like a brown hill, and then in the background you have like this golden, like canola, this golden yellow hill, and having that color separation absolutely helps. But you can still get that separation almost as effectively with black and white, just by playing with those colors, especially with digital, but even with film. So I didn't really notice any reason to bother even trying with color. Not that I would ever release a color image.
No, I mean that's like for peasants. Yeah.
I will say, and it was funny because the group that I was with, they were asking about my photography and that kind of deal, and when we did one image review through the whole trip, and all of my photographs, of course, were in black and white. And they were asking, is all that you shoot in black and white? Or do you shoot in color? And then a couple other questions came from that. And when I told them that, it's all black and white, they're like, well, have you tried like doing any color or anything? And just for the fun of it, I went and I had a photograph that was a little bit more abstract, and I knew that it was going to look better in color than black and white. Yeah. And so I went into Lightroom and I start processing it in color, and I couldn't get it where I wanted it to be. Color has always been a major struggle for me, and it's why I initially gravitated towards black and white. And now I'm so used to editing and processing and seeing in black and white. I know what works well in monochrome to the point where I don't know. I just don't really, it's not a skill set that I have any desire to learn or to work towards. So I just don't really bother. But it was just funny, like, as I'm trying to process this image, it's not coming together how I want it to. I'm like, you know what? This is why I don't bother with color.
Yeah. So from your standpoint, color is more difficult than black and white.
Yes.
Is that how you view it?
Yeah. Okay. At least for me to, and it's always been this case, whether I've worked with film, because I've photographed some scenes with like Portra 400, Portra 100, or 160. Yeah. With various Portra, and I think at one point I even had some Velvia stock, but I don't remember if I used it or if I just sold it when I sold one of the camera.
Oh, yeah. just a big bonfire.
Yeah, exactly.
Velvia, throw it in there.
Yeah. Pretty colors as it lights up.
As it burns.
Yeah. No, it's just, I've tried with it, but it's just never been something that I felt I could get right in the ways that I wanted it to be right. Like, I wanted the colors to be very accurate and true to form. And
which is hard to do.
Exactly.
Because it usually ends up becoming something that is some variation of reality that, and that's one of the struggles I have with color, because I want the final image to really be close to the original, because that looking at the original subject is something that, you know, made me feel a certain way. And if I have a hard time getting back to that, I find that to be difficult. But I've certainly found what works, you know, pretty well for me. But I can definitely see how that would be, especially coming from black and white.
Yeah.
Where it feels like whatever you're doing is just taking you further from, you know, that place. Were you guys doing mostly like the golden light type photography, or was there any midday involved? What time of day? It
was a mix of things. So we went out for sunrise every single day, which I'm still reeling from, because 5 hours of sleep does not bode very well for me.
Yeah.
It was like 3:30 wake-up calls, 3 o'clock wake-up calls at the...
That's pretty early.
Yeah, at the destination by like 4 o'clock or so. That way, sunrise, by the time sun started to wake up around 4:50 or so, we were there and ready. We could see the changes of light and everything.
Yeah.
So we would do a sunrise shoot, and then we'd come back for breakfast, and then we typically do like a midday shoot, which was a lot of Americana, a lot of like the little towns that were around the silos and the farm equipment, that kind of deal. Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that I really loved on.
That seems like that would be especially good for black and white, because you have that time of day when you have more contrast to work with and all various shapes and textures and lines and all that.
Yeah, I actually came away with, so I created a collection in my Lightroom catalog just on Americana, and a variety of like a little bit wider scenes of the buildings, a little bit closer up scenes of certain details and the light and shadow interplay. And I have like 125 photographs of just Americana. I went really, really hard on that. And then we would come back from doing some of that stuff, and we'd eat early dinner and then go out for sunset. And mostly sunset was going up to Steptoe Butte and photographing there. That's really where the telephoto lenses came into play, where you really wanted that extended reach, because you had this massive scene in front of you where you were looking down on hundreds of miles of these rolling hills, and you were just picking out abstractions, little points, little details, without really any subject matter for the most part.
Yeah.
And then by 9 o'clock, we were back at our hotel. We didn't really do true sunset except for one night, mainly because you would have to be through the hills and you have to go up and shoot Steptoe Butte at least twice to be able to get an idea of, like, to really come away with something decent. Because it's just such a different way of photographing. But yeah, that's pretty much how the days were structured. So, they were very full days of a lot of different types of photography in that sense.
Nice. Now, were you helping out some of the other people there, or were you there mostly just kind of to check things out? What was your role during the experience?
I was doing a little bit of helping out. I didn't really take much of a hands-on approach, mainly because like the attendees didn't necessarily need it. There was one photographer there who especially didn't need it. He's a regular attendee of John's workshops. And he had a pretty good grasp on photography, especially of that area. The other two were mainly leaning on John, which, as they should. Like, it's his workshop, his ordeal. I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to start stepping on toes or anything. So I helped out a little bit with just giving some ideas for some of the other attendees on, if I saw that they were photographing something in one way, tried challenging them to photograph it in a slightly different manner and gave reasoning why.
Black and white.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Have you tried? I noticed that your screen is color. Have you tried this in black and white? But, for the most part, they had a decent enough grasp on everything that they didn't really need any sort of help. But I would say, so out of our entire trip, the biggest thing that I came away with was a majorly strengthened desire for teaching.
Okay. That's it doesn't surprise me. I mean, based on your background.
Yeah.
Do you foresee yourself at some point maybe leading workshops or anything along those lines?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nice.
Which kind of goes against like my more introverted personality, but it also fits very well with like you said, my teaching degree and my background with that and with education. I love being able to help people as much as I can and to educate them and to get them to see, especially when it comes to photography, to see in a different way and to challenge their thinking. And whether I teach through more traditional manners, through English, like K through 12, whatever it is, or if I'm teaching photography through workshops or some other like retreats or some other means, teaching has to play some sort of role in my life. There's no way around it as I see it anymore. Just because, like I said, I just enjoy it too much. I enjoy that process. That putting on that educator role is just part of who I am, I think.
Yeah. And also, you know, when it comes to being introverted stuff, if you are stepping into a role where there's an expectation that you are there to help people, to teach people and all that, that's different than if you're stepping into just a situation where there's just a bunch of people you have to make small talk to and all that sort of stuff. So I think when you have that role outlined already, I can see how, you know, it could definitely work just fine in that situation, whether it's teaching or workshops and stuff. I don't ever foresee myself doing workshops. I mean, I totally understand what you're saying. And back when I used to work at the camera store, I did some classes there and stuff. And again, it was taking that role, and I was fine with it. But at the same time, I don't know. I find that I'm already so, I don't want to say the word busy because I'm not busy, but I already have so much on my mind in terms of the stuff that I'm doing on my own, in terms of my own photography and everything else along with that I find that there just isn't the time to take on more stuff. But I do understand that because I think because I'm thinking back to some of the classes and stuff I teach, there's almost like this little sense of a high that you get when doing that, when everything's clicking, everything's going well. Of course, there's also those times when things, you know, don't go as well, and you know, it's not quite as good of experience. But I think by and large, it's typically a pretty good experience. So that's good to hear.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about it too is I think, and from talking to some other photographers who lead workshops, there are a lot of people out there who are teaching for the wrong reasons, in the sense that when you think about landscape photography, nature photography, there are very few ways to actually make a decent amount of money off of this. You can try the route of print sales, but good luck. And
Yeah.
other than that,
Unless your name rhymes with Peter Lick.
Yeah, exactly. Other than that, it's primarily like teaching, putting on some teacher role, whether it's doing webinars or workshops or tour guides or anything like that. And so I think a lot of people who love nature photography and want to make a go at it professionally, they start doing workshops, but they don't have the desire to teach as much as they have the desire to get out and take pretty photos.
Yeah, they see that as just the next step in what everyone else is doing. So therefore, they should do it too because it's, quote, easy money, which I don't necessarily think that it is.
It definitely isn't. I mean, it's much the same as teaching in the traditional sense too. Like, there's a reason why a lot of those who have their degree for teaching end up burning out in the first 3 years of it. Like, you can tell if someone is not meant to teach because they'll be done with it within 3 years or less than. You have a massive drop right around that time period. And so
I wasn't aware of that, but I see how that makes sense.
Yeah. So once they always say that if you can get past the 3-year mark with teaching high school, middle school, elementary, whatever it is, then you're good to go. You'll be able to make it. But those are the hardest years for it too. And I think that with workshops, it's much the same, where, like I said, you just have a lot of people who are doing this because they don't know of any other way that's as reliable to make a living with photography. And so they're just going out and they're trying to teach, and they honestly just aren't good at it. They don't fit the personality. They don't do it for the right reasons. Whereas, at least with me, I would like to think that I have that desire to teach. I have that desire to actually help people, to challenge them and everything. And just to try to make a difference. So, I don't know. We'll see what ends up happening in the next few years. Right now, I think my next step is to try and figure out how I can go about one-to-one teaching, one-to-one workshops in my area, my own stomping grounds, and see how that goes, to kind of get reviews and get experience with it.
And also that would be a easier undertaking than if it was more of a location-based area where there's so many, permits and other regulations and insurance and stuff like that you would need to have, which basically makes the one-to-one stuff unfeasible. That's actually a conversation I've had with other people, usually from the UK, where, talking about how, why don't you do workshops? I said, well, for the areas that I go to, in order to do the workshops, one would need to, there's lots of fees and permits and licenses and insurance and stuff, to the point where if you just do a one-to-one sort of thing, it's not feasible. Plus, also, the rules here are different as far as, like whether it's Zion in particular. Death Valley is probably a little bit more lenient, but there are so many places that you cannot go. And actually, all the places that I love going for my own photography would be off limits for workshops. So that's that, plus just the fact that I just would rather do my own thing. I don't have that. I don't have the interest in teaching because I know it's not my strong suit. It's just not. I'd rather just be off doing my own thing. But yeah, there's a lot of hurdles, to the point where for you doing that in your local area would certainly allow you to get your feet wet more with it, and to start building some of that muscle in terms of what works really well. And all that. So I think that would be a good move.
Yeah, it's just a matter for me. Like, I was talking to another photographer, and I think we'll actually have him as the featured photographer instead of who we were talking about earlier. Now that I think about it, make a little mid-episode shift here.
Yeah. Peter Lick.
Yeah, how'd you know? Come on, Ben, don't ruin it for people.
Yes.
Anyway, I was talking to this photographer, and he's on the western side, or mid to western side of Pennsylvania, and we were talking a little bit. He just created his new website, and I was looking through it for him and kind of gave him a little bit of unsolicited advice, which I don't like doing because it's gross. But at the same time, I couldn't help myself but to just make mention of it. Mm-hmm. And I was telling him like that gallery curation could be better for his site. Mm-hmm. And we were talking a little bit about that, and he agreed entirely with it, which is also good. Because it's even worse when you give unsolicited advice and then they tell you to like go pound sand.
Yes.
So we were talking about that, and I think what's ultimately going to happen is he's going to send me the gallery images, and I'm going to just throw them into my Lightroom catalog and record myself going through them and giving my reasons, my thoughts behind everything. Why some images don't work in my view versus others, which ones are stronger, which you can just get rid of and not even consider, that kind of deal. Kind of like a portfolio review. And I'm going to go ahead and just try that and see obviously what his reception of it is, but also to get a little bit of practice with something like that too, because I think I have at least a little bit of knowledge in this head of mine and maybe a touch of skill. To actually be able to do that and offer that for people as well.
Now that would be basically you recording it, doing it versus like almost like a Zoom call sort of thing where you're talking with him about stuff.
Yeah, more of a record thing. Because I've seen people
do it both ways.
Yeah, I know that Brooks Jensen, when I did a portfolio review with him, he did it this same way where you just send him the images, he goes through the Lightroom catalog, talks a little bit about it, and you essentially ask him, when you send the images, you go through this form that gives him information on what your feedback you're looking for, what you expect from these images, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm mainly doing it this way right now because it's just what's easiest for me with my timetable with the magazine and everything else. But if I were to offer this as a public thing, it would probably be done through Zoom, at least most of the time, because I feel that interaction between people and being able to have people, being able to actually talk to people and get their reasoning at that second with everything is much more beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I see pros and cons both ways. I mean, I see how if it's something that's completely recorded, then it's not going to be based on any of the interactions with the person. I can see how maybe it might be easier to be more truthful about it if the person's not sitting there looking at you as you're talking about it. But also if it is a two-way, video call, then the person could explain things a little bit. But I think the whole point of it is that it's, explaining it doesn't really help the situation because it's all about how that work is perceived. And, the artist doesn't necessarily have the ability to explain things to everyone else. So it would be a different sort of feedback.
The other thing that him and I were talking about was kind of ties in line with our being in Pennsylvania and this whole mentorship and portfolio review thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas everyone, at least that I know, that was making a go at photography on a professional basis has left the state. I mean,
that's interesting.
The only person that I know of that hasn't is John Barkley, who, surprisingly enough, the guy lives 20 minutes away from me. We live like right in the same area, but it took the both of us to travel to the Palouse around the same time to actually meet.
It's funny how that works.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But besides him, there's really no other photographers professionally in this area that I know of, and very few along the northeastern section of the country.
Is there a trend as to where they've gone, or the
Colorado
reasons why?
or the PNW?
Okay, so definitely going out where the landscape's a bit more dramatic.
Yeah, where the landscape is more dramatic, where most people tend to go for workshops. And so why live on the East Coast if you're going to be teaching mainly on the West Coast? You know?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense from an economic standpoint or from an environmental standpoint to constantly be flying all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I definitely take for granted the fact that I live in pretty close proximity to, where I'm just a half day's drive away from some of my favorite places. And of course, there's no coincidence that those are my favorite places because they're only half day's drive away. But yeah, I mean, to think about if one was in a place where you have to travel a very long distance, I definitely see why it would be appealing to get up and move at some point. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about how there would be areas where, the people would have to move away from in order to do something like landscape photography, which seems like you're traveling regardless, but that definitely does make sense.
But where the difficulty comes in when it comes to like mentorship and such is it's really difficult to do a proper mentorship with someone if it's online or if you can't meet with them physically and see the way that they work or do one-on-one workshops with them. And that's something that this section of the country, at least Pennsylvania and New York specifically, seems to really be lacking, at least from what I've been able to tell. And a part of me feels as though it is a void that needs to be filled. That's where I could kind of come in and offer these teaching services for those around us. There's a lot
of people there. Yeah.
Yeah. But the other side of me is like, well, if everybody is hyping up the more dramatic scenes of the West, how many people are truly going to appreciate the quieter beauty that we have on the East? I mean, the only workshops that are really, really taught on the East side are Acadia and the Smokies. Other than that, there are a few in like the Adirondacks and Shenandoah and that kind of area, but still, I don't know. Like I said, all of this is just kind of, again, as usual, budding ideas that I need to try and figure out how to appropriately market myself and see if there is the hunger for these types of services on this side, because it is absolutely something that I would love to do. I mean, even doing one-to-ones where I have to travel a little bit, where I might meet up with someone in the Adirondacks for a day or a long weekend or something, and be able to work with them, or travel down to Shenandoah or whatever the case is.
And how would that because you've mentioned how you've wanted to, maybe move up to, you'd mentioned Vermont and was it New Hampshire as well? I can't remember, Maine. You'd mentioned like it'd be your dream to move up to those places. I can see how if you're in Maine, then you're up towards Acadia and stuff. But it seems like you would have to, if you were to move to those areas, you'd really have to, I wouldn't say put them on the map, but really just build a really strong body of work from some of those areas to start attracting clients. Because it seems like that'd be pretty cool if you were able to have almost kind of like how Simon Baxter has the areas that he goes to photograph that are close to him. Mm-hmm. But if you were to have it where you have like this great place to live, but also the photography stuff, it seems like that would be a great combo, but also that would take a lot of work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I only make it harder on myself because trying to market black and white photography is...
Yes. Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Good luck. John Peterson and I were talking a little bit about that when we were out in the Palouse. Like, he was saying that he is leaning more towards photographing in black and white these days, but because of the workshop, he needs to photograph in color. It's a part of it. It's a necessity for him at this point because of the clientele that he's brought in. But then I also look at guys like Michael Gordon and Chuck Kimmerly, who they're teaching workshops together now, and Chuck is all black and white. I think it's all a matter of who or how you market yourself and what kind of niche you find yourself in, and finding those people that can appreciate it and realize that just because you photograph in black and white doesn't mean that you can't photograph in color or teach someone to photograph in color, because you're still seeing the same things. You're still noticing the same things. It's just that color is an afterthought versus being the primary focus.
But also, I think there's some marketing potential perhaps for a black and white workshop, because so many people shoot in color because I think to them, and myself included, black and white seems harder, right? Because we most of us see in color, and so the color seems to come more naturally. So black and white can seem a little bit intimidating, but think about it from a workshop perspective. If you say, "Oh, this is a black and white workshop," yeah, you don't have to worry about those sunrise and sunset shoots. You can just enjoy brunch.
Yeah.
Go out at midday, relax a little bit, take your time. You're not going to have this time crunch where you have like 30 seconds of good light. And then, back, have yourself a nice dinner. So there could be some marketing advantages to a black and white if you convince people to go to the dark side, But it would actually be interesting because it would change the way that people think. It would definitely take them out of their comfort zone. So even though, yes, people are attracted to color images, it's what sells workshops. But if you make it so that the whole point of it is black and white, I think people would go into it knowing that they are definitely going to learn something, and they will end up seeing things from a different perspective. And I think there's a lot of value there. It's just a matter of convincing people that that is a sort of leap that they're willing to take.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there are definitely pros and cons to it. And you can still teach in the same way. You're still pushing people to expand their creativity in the same manners. It's just a matter of marketability in a world where everyone values color over black and white. And what's really unfortunate about it is that a lot of YouTube photographers also will they'll show their photographs and they'll rely on black and white to make a shitty photograph slightly better.
Yes.
And that also puts a sour taste in my mouth, especially, but also it doesn't really do much for other photographers, because they think, oh, well, this photograph the color didn't work, the sunset wasn't right. Well, let's turn it into black and white and up the contrast a bit, and okay, it's better now. And now I can actually use it.
It's just viewed as a backup plan.
Exactly. And so I think there's a maybe not a super steep learning curve, but nonetheless a learning curve or a hurdle, maybe is a better word, for people to get over, where black and white has to be what you actually think about before you think about color. And so you have to see in a slightly different way. And Emmy is agreeing with me in the background.
Yes. And there's definitely some parallels to our conversation earlier when you're talking about it taking a little bit of time for you to become accustomed to working with the long lens and finding subjects. But, after you said, a couple of days or whatever, that became more natural. Mm-hmm. But I think if it was a workshop situation, it's an area where people could see some rather dramatic growth in a fairly short period of time once they allow themselves to shift to that different way of thinking, which I don't know if that happens quite as much on a traditional workshop. It seems like people already go in with a certain skill set, and maybe there's certain things that they're accomplishing, but I don't know that it's going to necessarily change the way that they see things quite as dramatically as that. So I think there's something to that.
Yeah, we'll see. Only time will tell. But for right now, I think the main focus of mine is going to be, actually publishing the photographs that I have from Acadia from last year and from Colorado from last year, and getting Emmy to stop barking in the background at God knows what.
Yeah.
I think my fiance is still somehow sleeping and not taking care of her. But anyway, I have a lot of photographs that need titles, and not just from this trip. It's pretty bad.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I think Amy's trying to give you some suggestions in the background there with all the words that she knows.
Yes, I think so. All of her woof woofs and woof 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 and ruff ruff.
Now, is she saying that it's time for the artist of the week?
I think that she might be at this point. Yeah, it seems about
because I
right.
do understand a little bit of dog, just a little bit.
Yeah. You learn to understand it a little bit.
Yeah.
So, in order to best appease Emmy and hopefully get her to shut up for a minute, we are going to...
She's quieter now.
Yeah, for a second. Our artist of the week and the individual I was referencing a little bit earlier, I've been emailing back and forth with, is Garrett Hess. And he is I sent you the link to his website in the chat
right now.
So he is I go to his about page so I get everything right here. He describes himself as a joke-making, craft beer drinking, metal music listening photographer from Erie, Pennsylvania. He goes on to say, I've spent my life exploring Northwest Pennsylvania and the surrounding areas, but for the past few years, I've been doing so with a camera. Although we may not have the most epic scenery, I firmly believe that there is plenty of beauty being found. Sometimes you just have to look a little harder to find it. Without trying to sound dramatic or cliche, this art form has changed my life. It has become my source of meditation, connection, and inspiration. I've learned so much about myself throughout this journey, and I apply that to my craft. I strive to capture emotion and passion in my work, and I try to include a piece of myself into every photograph. My work is a reflection of me. So Garrett and I connected on various points when I was on Instagram. We've talked a little bit on and off through there. And now we've been emailing back and forth over the past 2 months or so, I want to say, just trying to stay connected. Because like I said earlier, there aren't a lot of Pennsylvania-based photographers, at least that I'm familiar with. And so it's always nice to connect with someone who at least understands the struggle of this very chaotic, at least photographically speaking, this very chaotic state. So
I'm looking at his gallery with the details gallery, and one of the pictures there, it's a vertical photo, stone texture with a mostly blackened leaf with some pieces missing from it, and it's a second row down on the far right. Really cool textures, the way that like everything swirls around in these warm and cool tones, and then it's interesting how the leaf with a piece missing is on this little curve of a rock. It almost looks like it's embedded in the rock, which is really cool. I'm always a sucker for detail shots, so that one definitely caught my eye there. Lots of really cool water shots, sand, really good use of light, really calm light. Checking out all the other galleries as well. Yeah,
like you, I'm always going to gravitate towards those detail shots. I mean, it makes life quite a bit easier, especially when dealing with the chaos of the forest. It's not everyone can be, Simon Baxter making these brilliant, intimate yet wider photographs of the forest. And also there's in the Woodlands and Water Gallery, and at about the same place on the page as the previous one, there's a vertical photo of a tree against a bit of a foggy background, and the trunk goes up, then it kind of cuts hard to the right, then it grows up again. It has a nice kind of very round form for all the branches there, which is interesting because there's a little bit of color in the foreground. It's a color photo, but there's a little bit of kind of a reddish, rusty tones in the foreground. But overall, it's a very subdued color palette. And it totally looks like a photo like this would work very well in black and white. But I do like that it's in color because you get that little bit of color contrast from the reddish tones, which is really nice. It also tells such a story. Like, how did that, or why rather, did that tree decide to just like maybe 2 or 3 feet up, just decide, you know what, I'm going to go in a new direction. Yeah. And I'm just going to go this way for a little bit and see what happens. Like, there's when I went on my backpacking trip, there was this really large cottonwood tree, and it got basically it broke in half. And the part that it broke in half is a good, 15 something feet up, and then all these other branches came in, and so they grow out from that area where it broke. But same thing, where you can tell that something
traumatic happened to that tree.
Yeah.
Yet it's bouncing back and it's thriving, which I always love that story aspect of when you see trees like that.
Yeah. There's a photograph in his This Is Eerie gallery that is, at least how I have it oriented. It's another vertical photograph, and it looks to be like almost like a lighthouse. I don't know. I think it's a lighthouse, but these dark blue stormy skies behind it with the rows of
looking at
the yellow tinted lights. Personally, I'd change it to black and white with high contrast, but the colors are nice.
Yes. Well, this is one that would certainly go well either way, because you have that really dramatic sky and the texture from it. And when it's in color, you get this really nice color contrast, but in black and white, it'd probably look even more menacing with this texture in the sky and these low hanging clouds.
Yeah, he's got quite a number of really nice shots throughout his galleries.
Yeah, he's got some beautiful work. Definitely worth checking out. Also, I should mention that whenever I see on a person's website they have a recent work gallery, that's usually what I look at first.
Oh, absolutely.
Which has me thinking, like, I really need to add one of those to my website. Because there's just something about seeing the most recent work, which you see, where that person is at an artist at this point in time.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of value to that. So that's also a really good takeaway from it.
Yeah, there definitely is. I go back and forth. Anyone who's been on my website who has visited my website somewhat regularly over the past few years knows that it's undergone a ton of changes ad nauseum. But how I have it set up right now, I definitely do agree with you that a recent works, or whatever you want to call it, kind of gallery is almost a necessity, I would think.
Yeah.
It's just, like you said, it's one of the first things that I go to just to kind of see, okay, what is the work? What work are they creating right now? That's the most recent. Where is their vision at? Like, get a kind of taste for their photography and then start going through the galleries, because there's certain galleries or certain images in various galleries that could be 10, 20 years old, depending on the photographer, and could be dramatically different depending on cohesion of the gallery. But
and that's something where I would love to add one of those to my site, but my site is hosted through Squarespace. And the way that it works for the number of galleries, if I add one more, then it throws off like the layout. So I'd have to add several more. So I'm like, either that or I just get rid of one of the other ones, which I could do. But I don't know. I think I'll just keep procrastinating on that one.
It was speaking on gallery curation. I go back and forth on whether I want to do them in like collections of work, kind of like what you have it. But at the same time, I really love how I have it set up right now, where it's by year. And so you can kind of also see that progression of my vision and how I've gone about my photography differently over the years. Yeah. But I don't know. It's always up in the air kind of question.
Yeah, I think for me with the galleries, I feel like I need some place to file away new photos. Like when I have new photos I need to add to the website, I'm like, all right, I'll put it in this one, put it in this one, put it in this one. But I do like the approach of having it by year as well, even if it's like a link down below or something like that, where you can, view them by year instead. But I think that's also a little bit beyond what, at least what my current Squarespace setup is able to easily do. But I do appreciate having the ability to view it both ways. But yeah. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.